Welcome back to Newsday. Well, Foreign Minister Julie Bishop has furiously rejected claims by a Labor MP that she has allowed Australia to cosy up to Iran. Melbourne MP Michael Danby has erected a giant billboard at St Kilda Junction in Melbourne saying, "Say no to Bishop's Iran deal." Joining me now is Labor MP Michael Danby. Michael Danby, thanks so much for your time. Julie Bishop has responded to that billboard saying it's juvenile. What exactly are you concerned about?
Well, it's juvenile except for the fact that Julie Bishop is talking about having intelligence sharing and defence cooperation with Iran, a government that sponsors Hezbollah terrorist organisation, which is classified by the Australian Parliament, not by Julie Bishop, not by me, but by the Australian Parliament impartially as a terrorist organisation. And she's talking about taking off sanctions on Iran, which were agreed by Australia, and opening consulates of Iran and in Melbourne and Sydney. That's pretty serious, Laura, and it's laughable to be responded to by the Foreign Minister getting furious and saying that this is juvenile when these are very serious issues. She's done worse over the weekend, in my view, when she was having a meeting with after she was having a further meeting with the Iranians. She announced on the front page of Saturday's Australian that Australia was going to give its imprimatur to the Russian-Iranian attempt to keep in power the butcher of Damascus, President Assad, who's killed 200,000 of his own people, as you said in the intro earlier, Laura, in the last few years, and who Human Rights Watch says is responsible for 85% of the civilian deaths over the last year.
OK, let's go to the intelligence sharing with Iran to begin with. I understand your reservations when it comes to Hezbollah in particular, but isn't it the political reality at the moment that Iran is in the fight against Daesh and that is our fight as well? So it's a practical political measure that Australia should at least entertain with safeguards.
If we're talking about making sure we don't kill each other in operations in Iraq, that's one thing. But Australia to date has not been involved in the war in Syria. In fact, that was the whole reassurance of the government, that we were not involved in Syria in the recent debate when they got the opposition to it.
We are now, Michael Danby, and this seems to be a bipartisan position that we are in Syria at the moment in an air raid capacity with the collective self-defence of Iraq and the Iraqi people. This is something that your leader, Bill Shorten, seems to be comfortable with.
Yes, I'm comfortable with it too, but I've got the map here, Laura, and this is Iraq, and we're involved in raids here in the grey area where Daesh is involved. What we're talking about is a Russian and Iranian plan to throw back the rebels in the south of Syria and in the north of Syria, who are Sunni people, 80% of whom are being barrel bombed every day by this Assad butcher. They have nothing to do with Daesh. Why, if we're involved over here in Iraq, do we have to have a dog in this fight between 80% of the Syrian population and Assad? I think Julie Bishop has bitten off more than she can chew.
But let's get to the solution of this. Now, we know that the situation in the Middle East, in Syria in particular, is no easy one, but no one can point to a situation in Syria where there might be peace. Who is going to take over? Who is going to take over the leadership and the government? I think it is a political reality, wouldn't you agree, that any solution in the Middle East needs to at least be looking at Assad involvement? It would be silly perhaps to ignore that.
I don't agree at all. I think the longer Assad stays there, the more his air force is going to be continuing to drop, as it has over the last 2 years since the Americans bugged out the last time of blowing up his chemical plants. The civilians are continuing to flee to Lebanon, Turkey and Jordan, and then on to Europe. The longer he's left there, the least chance there is of a peace coming. And that's why, in fact, the Russians inserted their 2 air wings into Latakia and that area, where it's the last holdout of the Assad regime. Assad was down to 20% of control of Syria.
Well, on the other side of the coin,
not to be supporting him.
On the other side of the coin, then, Barack Obama said there was a red line. He threatened to bomb the Assad regime. He didn't do so. Tony Abbott, and this is again a bipartisan issue, says the fight against Assad is not Australia's fight. So then, would you support air raids against the Assad regime as an extension of just raiding and bombing Islamic State?
No, in the part of Syria that I'm talking about, our policy to date has for Australia not to get involved. That's what Bill Shorten has said recently on the weekend, that both sides were as bad as each other. I think we should be arming and training the Kurds, who seem to be the only ones who really want to fight Islamic State or Daesh, and we should be talking about what Tanya Plibersek was talking about, having a humanitarian corridor in this northeastern section of Syria, where the UN agencies could go in, where Turkey could provide some air defence for them against Syria, dropping these barrel bombs on the population, and where the people of Syria could flee rather than flee out of the country. There'd be a safe haven, haven in their own country.
Can I just go to your criticisms of Julie Bishop once again, though? You say closing up to Iran, but isn't it better to at least be in dialogue with Iran rather than freezing them out altogether? That has solved, well, history shows that has solved no problems in the past.
As a general proposition, that sounds very nice, Laura, but we know the experience in other Western countries of Iran having consulates and diplomatic representation outside the capital. It's defensible for Australia to have an embassy in Tehran and for them to have one closely monitored by our security services in Canberra. But to have consulates in Melbourne and Sydney, this is a dire danger to the Australian people. There are conflicts between the Shia and Sunni communities in Melbourne and Sydney, and in Buenos Aires 15 years ago, the Iranian diplomats were involved in blowing up a community centre where 90 people were killed. We don't want that kind of involvement of the Iranians in Australia.
Can I ask you one more question about these billboards you've erected in St Kilda Junction? It depicts Julie Bishop with a headscarf on when she visited Iran a number of months ago. It says, "Say no to Bishop's Iran deal." Your critics have said, and might continue to say, that this could be a bit of a dog whistle to the more racist elements of the Melbourne community. What do you have to say to that?
Oh, that's nonsense. There's no one more opposed to racism, including against the Islamic community in Australia, than me. This is a political criticism. The picture is from the Iranian government and Julie Bishop's Department of Foreign Affairs website, and I'm criticising her political policy of aligning ourselves with a government with whom Australia has nothing in common, who has killed under capital punishment 700 people this year, hangs gay people in public squares and persecutes peaceful minority religions like the Baha'i. There's nothing to do with dog whistling. This is to do with a political opposition to a government that can't tell the difference between the Daesh in eastern Syria and the two non-Daesh groups who are taking on the Russians, Iranians and Hezbollah in the rest of the country. I can understand it. I'm sure Julie Bishop's advisors can understand it. I can't understand why she's agreeing to a Russian and Iranian peace over this whole area.
And just finally, who paid for the billboard? Did you receive donations from the Jewish lobby to pay for this?
Well, not the Jewish lobby. It was privately donated, but you know, it certainly wasn't any government funding involved in those billboards.
Labor MP Michael Danby, as always, thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure, Laura.